First thing I remember is the sudden, unnatural stillness in the boardroom. Not a pause, but a complete cessation of sound, like someone had hit a mute button on the universe. And then I saw their faces. 8 of them, people I'd known my whole life, shifted uncomfortably in their seats around the long, polished mahogany table, avoiding my gaze. All except David. He sat at the head, in my father's chair, wearing an expression I'd never seen before, like he'd finally grown tired of pretending. "We need to discuss your future with Viridian," David said, his voice dripping with a false sympathy that made my skin crawl. That word, kiddo. I was 34 years old, the chief operating officer of a company my father, James, had built from scratch into a billion-dollar operation. A company that had fundamentally changed how we diagnose cancer. My future was right here. Robert, the investor who talked about markets like they were a religion, shuffled his papers, talking to the table instead of me. The board has concerns about leadership continuity. Market confidence requires stability right now. I'd been in this company since I could walk. Literally. I learned to navigate those labs, between the centrifuges, before I learned to ride a bike. Other kids had swing sets, I had clean rooms and petri dishes. By 32, I'd earned my COO title the hard way, grinding in R&D until even the most jaded PhD researchers stopped calling me the boss's privileged kid. I knew every single operation, every protocol, every patent. "You know the operations," Suzanne interjected, her voice cracked slightly. Guilt, maybe. Or just the strain of forcing the words out. "But we're proposing an interim arrangement. David as acting CEO, with you in a special advisory role. Full compensation." David leaned forward, his true self finally shedding its skin. "The board has voted. Effective immediately. You're being transitioned out of your role." He slid a folder across the table like he was offering me a menu. Inside, a sealed sympathy card, and severance papers, 6 months' salary, a grief leave suggestion, a line about transitioning with dignity. At that exact moment, my company email stopped working. I watched the notification pop up on my laptop, * your credentials have been disabled. Contact IT * someone had literally pressed a button to delete me mid-sentence. The words hit like physical blows. Around the table, these 8 faces, people who'd eaten at our family table, celebrated holidays with us, watched me grow up, avoided my gaze. Only David looked at me directly, and in his eyes, I saw the truth. This had been planned long before my father's body was cold. Sarah from HR appeared at the door, holding a cardboard box. Not even a proper file box, just a printer paper box with my name sharpened on the side. "We'll mail any personal items that require review," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Need security to escort me out?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "It's protocol, kiddo. For the company's protection." There it was again. Kiddo. 2 guards, Frank and another, appeared like they'd been waiting for their cue. They probably had. As I gathered my things with deliberate calm, I slipped my father's Mont Blanc pen into my pocket. They wouldn't get that, too. I looked each board member in the eye before I left, memorizing their faces. "You're making a mistake." David's smirk widened. "This isn't over." I didn't argue further. As the guards flanked me through the building my father built, past employees watching in shocked silence, I started collecting names in my head. The first thing I did after being escorted out was drive to my father's grave. I sat in my car, engine running, staring at the fresh headstone while my hands shook with barely contained rage. Then I made myself breathe. Think. Dad always said emotion was data, but strategy required a cool head. You can't play chess while your brain's on fire. James Morgan, my father, had died on a Tuesday. A heart attack at his desk. Working on an immunotherapy protocol he believed could extend remission periods by up to 40%. The coroner said it was instant. No pain, just gone between one heartbeat and the next. I'd found him myself, coming in early to review quarterly projections. His coffee was still warm. The funeral was a blur of black suits and hollow condolences. David held my mother, Vivian's, arm, whispering about honoring James's legacy. Vivian didn't cry, not once. I told myself she was being strong. Told myself grief hits people differently. Told myself a lot of things that let me sleep at night. 3 weeks. That's how long they waited after we put him in the ground. I didn't hire some investigator to dig around. Didn't need to. I had something better, people inside Viridian who actually cared about what the company was supposed to stand for. That same night, I got a call from Leo, one of our IT administrators. Kid had been with the company 6 years, started as an intern. Dad had personally approved his last 2 promotions. I saw what happened today, Leo said, his voice tight with anger. It's wrong. Everyone's talking about it. And I think you should see some things I found while doing routine server maintenance. Things that weren't supposed to be there. What he showed me over a laptop at a 24-hour diner made my blood run cold. Leo opened a shared drive folder labeled Transition Plan. Inside, another folder, Post-JM Leadership Realignment. The creation date was 6 weeks before Dad died. Then the emails. 8 months of them. They'd been planning this coup while Dad was still alive, while they smiled at him across the conference table and toasted his health at company parties. One line stopped me cold, Suzanne writing to Robert, once he's out of the picture, move quickly to sideline the son before he can rally support. Out of the picture, they'd written that while Dad was still breathing. My hands clenched around my laptop so hard the plastic case creaked in protest. The emails revealed their endgame, sell off Viridian's core research division to Zenith Biologics, our biggest competitor. The patents Dad spent 20 years developing. The formulas that could save millions of lives. All packaged and sold for a quick profit. Golden parachutes for the board, pink slips for everyone else. And the paper trail on their individual side hustles was ugly. Kickbacks, stock manipulation, conflicts of interest. Each of them had their hand in a different cookie jar. Paul, the nervous compliance guy, was the only exception. David had leverage on him. Paul wasn't greedy, he was trapped. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a coordinated gutting. But the document that changed everything was buried in a legal folder. Our corporate bylaws, last amended 15 years ago. I'd read them before, of course, but never with this kind of desperate attention. Section 47B, subsection 3, in the event of contested control, any shareholder or coalition of shareholders holding 75% or more of outstanding shares may call an extraordinary meeting and reverse any board decision, including but not limited to personnel changes with immediate effect, 75%. I pulled up our shareholder registry. The board collectively controlled 31%. Various institutional investors held another 40%. The remaining 29% was scattered among employees, early investors, and small funds. Dad's estate, my inheritance, included 22% of the company. I needed another 53%. Over half the company, acquired quietly without anyone noticing until it was too late. Impossible, maybe. But I had something the board didn't expect. The truth about what they were planning. And more importantly, I had relationships with people who actually cared about Viridian's mission. People who remembered what Dad stood for. My apartment became a war room. Whiteboards covered every wall, mapping out shareholders, their connections, their motivations, their price points. I color-coded them. Green for confirmed allies. Yellow for possibles who might swing either way. Red for those too deep in the board's pocket to ever flip. The reds were depressingly numerous at first, but that just meant there was nowhere to go but up. 8 weeks until the annual shareholder meeting. I collected proxies like trading cards, coffee shops, gym parking lots, kids' soccer games, anywhere I could accidentally run into shareholders who remembered what Dad stood for. Leo's evidence folder did the heavy lifting. One look at the Zenith emails and most of them signed on the spot. Employee retirement funds, pension funds, family trusts. Each percentage point was a victory recorded in green marker on my war room walls. Then I made my first mistake. Leo had been feeding me updates via text. Quick hits about board movements, internal memos, shareholder communications. I got sloppy. Texted him back something dumb, keep digging on the Zenith files. Need the kickback numbers. 2 days later, Leo called me from a payphone. His voice was tight with controlled panic. They flagged our text chain during a routine audit. David demanded to know why I was communicating with you outside company channels. My stomach dropped. What did you tell them? That you texted asking about your 401k rollover? And I responded out of habit. They bought it, barely. He paused. But I'm burned as a source. They're watching me now. I can't access the restricted servers anymore without raising flags. I'd almost blown my best inside asset because I couldn't keep my thumbs off a phone. Stupid. Careless. The kind of mistake that gets you caught. Leo's cover story held, but the lesson was learned. No more digital trails. The real breakthrough came 3 weeks in. Eleanor, portfolio manager at Polaris Capital, called me directly. Polaris held 7% of Viridian. Serious institutional money. Mr. Morgan, I've been watching some interesting movement in your company's shares. Small lots being accumulated through various channels. Your handiwork, I presume. My heart stopped. If she'd noticed, others might too. I'm also aware, she continued, that your stepfather has been making promises to my competitors. Sweetheart deals that specifically exclude Polaris. She paused, and I could hear the cold smile in her voice. I despise being taken for granted. Polaris's 7% is yours. One condition, when you retake control, you implement your father's 5-year strategic plan, the one the current board dismissed. Dad's last vision, expanding into personalized medicine, opening clinics in underserved communities. That's what they'd killed to make room for their scheme. Done. The board wasn't sitting idle. The same sedan parked outside my building at different hours. They were getting nervous. I kept collecting signatures. After 6 weeks of grinding, I had 51% committed. Close. Tantalizingly close, but not enough. I needed that 75% threshold to be untouchable. That's when I played my first offensive move. I incorporated Prometheus Biosystems, registered it in Nevada with minimal fanfare, just another startup in a sea of biotech hopefuls. Then I made very sure word reached the right ears. A casual mention at a biotech conference. A LinkedIn update about exciting new ventures in immunotherapy application. Within days, rumors tore through Viridian's halls like wildfire, the founder's son starting a competing company, trying to poach researchers, planning revenge. The board took the bait beautifully. 10 days later, emergency meetings were called. David sent a company-wide email demanding all employees sign supplemental non-compete agreements within 48 hours. The paranoia was delicious. Then David slipped. He sent an internal memo to all department heads, * reminder, do not discuss ongoing Zenith negotiations with anyone outside the board. This includes the former COO, * employees started forwarding it to each other with confused messages attached. * wait, what Zenith negotiations? Why would he mention that, * the board hadn't publicly acknowledged any Zenith discussions? David had just accidentally confirmed the rumor he was supposed to be denying. I fed the paranoia carefully, scheduled very public lunches with key Viridian researchers, not to recruit them, but to be seen doing it. David called me directly, trying to sound paternal. This vendetta helps no one, kiddo. Stop trying to steal our IP and we can discuss a more generous severance. Interesting. I hadn't mentioned anything about IP. Hadn't even hinted at recruiting anyone for real work. But David was so deep in his own guilt, he was answering questions I hadn't asked. I appreciate the concern, David. I'm happy where I am. 7 days. The psychological warfare intensified. Each rumor was crafted to be plausible but unprovable. Smoke without fire. Meanwhile, the real damage was happening in the market. Viridian's stock price continued its descent, down 15% over 3 weeks. Most of what I accumulated wasn't purchased outright. It was voting control through irrevocable proxy agreements. Shareholders who wouldn't sell were happy to sign over votes once they saw the Zenith emails. My actual purchases were modest, spread across 6 brokers, timed under 13D thresholds, masked by the sell-off volume. My attorney's securities team ran everything clean. My count grew to 71%, then 74%. Then it stalled for 5 days. I needed 75% minimum. I was stuck at 74.6%. The remaining uncommitted shares were scattered among small holders who either couldn't be reached or didn't care enough to get involved. Then everything almost fell apart. The transfer agent handling verification flagged 3 of my proxy agreements for additional review. Something about signature discrepancies. My attorney called me at 2 a.m., voice tight. If they reject these, you're at 71.2%. Below threshold, and their review committee doesn't meet until next Tuesday. I didn't sleep. My legal team worked the phones, escalating to the transfer agent's legal department. Turned out one board member's cousin worked there. Coincidence? I stopped believing in those weeks ago. At 4 p.m. the next day, my attorney called back. Cleared all 3. Their legal team reviewed the flagging criteria and found it was applied incorrectly. She paused. Someone tried to sandbag us from the inside. They failed. 74.6%. Still short, but still in the game. Then the board struck back. 4 days later, the hit piece dropped at 6 a.m. A business outlet ran the headline, Troubled Viridian, Secret Struggles. Anonymous sources painted a picture of a man spiraling. Erratic behavior. Grief-induced breakdowns. Whispers of substance issues never substantiated, but expertly implied. The article mentioned I'd been let go, framing my ouster as a compassionate intervention rather than a coup. But one line made my vision go red. A concerned former colleague claimed there had been troubling incidents with female staff members, and that some employees were afraid he might show up at the building unannounced. No specifics, no names, just enough to make people wonder. Just enough to poison any Google search of my name for the next decade. My phone exploded. Worried allies calling to check in. Nervous shareholders suddenly having second thoughts. Eleanor's assistant called to say she was reviewing the situation. I sat in my apartment watching weeks of work potentially unravel because someone planted a story and let it spread like poison. That's when Arthur called. Arthur, Dad's first CFO and longest-serving board member until he retired 5 years ago. I've been watching this circus from my place upstate New York, he said, his voice gravelly with age. Thought I was done with corporate warfare. Then I saw that garbage article this morning. That line about troubling incidents. I know what they're doing. I've seen this playbook before. Arthur, I didn't know you still followed the company. Your father built something worth following. And I keep very good records. He paused. David's been sloppy. That Bermuda account he uses, not as untraceable as he thinks. And I have a banker's box in my study that your father asked me to keep just in case. Arthur continued, I'm flying down tomorrow. Bringing some materials that might interest you, and my own 1.2% that I never sold. 74.6 plus 1.2 equals 75.8. I had my threshold. Arthur arrived the next morning carrying a box that looked innocuous enough. Inside were documents that made my previous intelligence look like grocery lists. Financial records showing David had been skimming from R&D budgets for years, funneling money through contractors that existed only on paper. Email threads between board members discussing how to manipulate stock prices around FDA announcements. Most damning, a recorded conversation from 2 years ago where David explicitly discussed waiting for James to step aside one way or another. He wore a wire. Arthur settled onto my couch. Your father was many things. Naive wasn't one of them. After David married your mother, James started documenting everything quietly. Said if anything happened to him, I should make sure you got these. I spent the next day with my attorney reviewing every document. We had enough to trigger a federal investigation. The SEC filing revealing my stake would hit Edgar tomorrow. But Arthur pulled out one more folder. His face had changed, harder somehow, reluctant. There's something else. Something your father hoped you'd never have to see. He handed me a stack of wire transfer records. Dates going back 5 years. Payments from shell companies I didn't recognize flowing into an account in Panama. Whose account? I asked, though something in my gut already knew. Your mother's. I stared at the numbers. Millions of dollars. Payments that started 3 months after she married David. I don't understand. Your father didn't either. Not until the end. Arthur's voice was heavy. He thought David was the architect. Spent 2 years documenting David's moves, building a case. Then 6 months before he died, he found these. He tapped the wire transfers. The trail doesn't lead to David. It leads through him. Your mother recruited David at a charity gala 7 years ago. She identified him as someone ambitious enough to execute, but vain enough to take the fall. Every major decision in this coup, the timing, the Zenith deal, the offshore structure, it all traces back to instructions she gave through encrypted channels. The room tilted. She divorced Dad to marry the weapon she'd built, Arthur nodded slowly. Your father confronted her 3 days before he died. She told him he'd chosen the company over his family for 30 years. Said she'd spent 3 decades being second place to a building full of centrifuges. She wanted what she was owed. That's when my mother called. Her voice came through the speaker like honey over broken glass. Soft, trembling. Exactly the way you'd expect a grieving widow to sound. Sweetheart, I just saw that horrible article. I'm so sorry. I had no idea David was capable of something like this. A sniffle. Perfectly timed. I feel so used. He told me the company needed steady leadership after your father passed. I believed him. I was grieving. I wasn't thinking clearly. I let the silence stretch. Let her fill it. You know I've always been on your side. I'm your mother. I only want what's best for you. Her voice cracked. Maybe we could meet. Talk about how to fix this together. As a family. Classic textbook manipulation. Position yourself as the victim. Create an alliance against the common enemy. It might have worked if I hadn't just finished reading Arthur's files. That's interesting, Mom. I kept my voice flat. Because I'm looking at an email from 8 months ago where you outlined the exact timeline for transitioning leadership away from emotional attachments. Your words, sent from an encrypted account you thought nobody could trace. The silence on her end was deafening. What did you? The honey evaporated from her voice mid-syllable. What replaced it was something colder, something I'd never heard before. Where did you get that? Dad kept records. She laughed. Actually laughed. But it wasn't her public laugh, the warm, tinkling one she used at charity events. This was different, low, and controlled. You're bluffing. You don't have anything substantial. The Panama accounts say otherwise. Another silence. Then be very careful, sweetheart. Her voice had dropped the maternal act entirely now. "You're playing a game you don't understand." "I understand." "Fine. We'll see about that." The line went dead. I stared at my phone for a long time. My mother, the woman who'd sung me lullabies, who'd bandaged my scraped knees, who'd apparently been planning corporate patricide while Dad was still alive. I'd been recording the whole call. 48 hours until the shareholder meeting, the board made their final mistake. They moved up the Zenith acquisition timeline, scheduling a special shareholder meeting in just 2 days to approve the strategic partnership. What they didn't know is that Zenith's promised support included several funds that had already secretly pledged their shares to me. They thought they were getting a compliant target company. Instead, they were walking into an ambush. I let the announcement stand for exactly 24 hours, long enough for the media to pick it up, for real shareholders to understand what was at stake. Then I called Eleanor. "It's time." Finally. I could hear her smile through the phone. "I was starting to think you enjoyed the theater too much." The next morning, business journalists received an anonymous package containing select excerpts from the board's internal emails. Nothing legally actionable yet, but enough to raise serious questions about conflicts of interest. The stock price tumbled another 5% by lunch. Meanwhile, I filed the formal paperwork with the SEC, revealing my 75.8% stake for the first time. Between Arthur's shares and the final quiet buys, I barely cleared the threshold. The 13D hit Edgar at 3:47 p.m., 13 minutes before market close. Bloomberg terminals lit up. Reporters pounced. The headlines were instantaneous: Morgan Heir discloses majority stake, proxy battle erupts at biotech firm. My phone exploded. Reporters wanting statements. Board members making desperate attempts to negotiate. My mother. I ignored them all except one. "Hello, David." Silence on his end stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. "You clever little brat," he finally breathed. "You got sloppy." Market opened in 22 minutes. My driver dropped me at the Viridian building. Media circus already forming. News vans, photographers, business reporters with hungry expressions. "It's like a movie premiere," he said. "It's a proxy fight." I stepped out. Cameras swung toward me. Reporters shouted questions. I walked past them without a word. Shoes clicking on the pavement with metronomic precision. The security guard at the desk, Frank, who'd been there 15 years, looked up as I approached. His face went through several expressions before settling on something like relief. "Mr. Morgan," he said it quietly, like a secret. "Welcome back." "I'm back." The elevator ride to the boardroom floor felt both endless and too quick. Each floor was a memory. The lab where I'd learned to use a microscope at 7 years old. The break room where Dad and I ate lunch together. At exactly 9:29, I turned to my attorney. "Whatever you hear, don't come in. This needs to be between me and them." I smoothed my suit one last time. Deep blue, Dad's favorite color. Gripped my briefcase containing the proxies that represented 75.8% of Viridian. Checked my phone. 9:30 a.m. market opens. I pushed open the boardroom door. The conversation stopped mid-sentence. 8 pairs of eyes turned to me, some nervous, some defiant, all recognizing that their carefully constructed coup was about to face its final reckoning. And in the corner seat, where she had no official reason to be, sat my mother, Vivian. "Good morning." David's face went from red to white to red again. "You have no right to be here." "Security." 2 guards appeared at the door. They looked at David, then at me, then at each other. Nobody moved. On paper, David was still chairman, but everyone in that building had seen the headlines this morning. "Gentlemen," my attorney stepped in behind me, wheeling boxes of documentation. Perhaps we can resolve the question of authority before anyone makes a career-ending decision. She handed the senior guard a single sheet of paper. SEC filing confirmation. 75.8% ownership. Verified and time-stamped. The guard read it twice. Then he stepped aside. David tried one last gambit. Those proxy agreements are invalid. We're challenging the transfers. This meeting is tabled until legal can review. My attorney didn't even blink. She pulled out a folder. The proxy agreements were verified by 3 independent transfer agents yesterday. Here are the confirmations, time-stamped, notarized, and already filed with the SEC. She laid it on the table. Would you like to continue, or should I call the securities attorneys waiting in the lobby? The bluff collapsed. David's face went gray. I didn't answer. I opened my briefcase. I'm here as the majority shareholder of Viridian Life Sciences. 75.8%. Robert shot to his feet. That's impossible. We've been tracking every trade. You tracked what I wanted you to track. I pulled out the stack of proxy agreements. While you were chasing Prometheus Bios, I was collecting votes. Suzanne's face had gone ashen. Those shell companies, the Nevada LLC, all legal. Unlike coordinating stock manipulation through Bermuda accounts or taking kickbacks from Zenith. David slammed his hand on the table. You're bluffing. Arthur says hello. I watched the blood drain from David's face. He kept good records. I pulled out David's private agreement with Zenith, then Suzanne's, then Robert's. Each one came with its own document. I laid them out like tarot cards predicting their doom. This is corporate blackmail, someone sputtered. Blackmail would be threatening to release this unless you complied. I checked my watch. The SEC receives these documents at 10:31 a.m. 1 hour. Counsel is handling the filing. The only question is whether you'll still be board members when they do. My attorney stepped forward. For the record, I'm filing notice of an extraordinary shareholder meeting pursuant to Section 47B of the corporate bylaws. The proxy firm has verified all proxy cards. As Mr. Morgan controls more than 75% of outstanding shares, he has the authority to reverse any and all board decisions effective immediately, including your decision to remove me as CEO. The board members looked at each other like trapped animals. David's face transformed into something ugly and desperate. You think you've won? Zenith has contracts ready. You'll destroy billions in value with this tantrum. Whose value? Yours? The $30 million you were promised for delivering our patent portfolio? I slid his personal agreement across the table. Suzanne's $15 million. Robert's $20. Enough theatrics. Suzanne tried desperately to rally. Even with 75.8%, you need board approval. Actually, you don't. Because you're all fired. Effective immediately. You can't. Section 52C, in cases of demonstrated breach of fiduciary duty, the majority shareholder may remove board members without cause or notice. I gestured to my attorney's boxes. Would you like to discuss what constitutes demonstrated? The room fell silent. Just the hum of air conditioning and someone's labored breathing. Resign now, quietly, and I'll consider not pursuing personal lawsuits. The criminal investigation will proceed. That's out of my hands. But you'll avoid civil litigation. This is a coup. David spat. No. What you did 3 months ago was a coup. You don't get to keep it. One by one, they broke. Robert was first. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself, just asked quietly, will resigning keep my name out of the court filings? Depends on how much you cooperate. He signed without another word and headed for the door. His badge beeped red. Your access has been revoked, my counsel said without looking up. Security will escort you. Suzanne followed. She paused at the table, opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, some approximation of an apology without actually using the word sorry. She couldn't find the words, just shook her head and signed. Paul was next. He stopped beside me and whispered, barely audible, David has something on me. He didn't explain what. Didn't need to. I know, I said. Cooperate with the SEC, and we'll see what can be done. The others filed past until only David remained. He tried to slip his laptop into his bag. Sir, Frank had appeared at the door, quiet and professional. You'll need to leave that. David's face contorted. That's my personal company property. Legal will coordinate return of personal items after review. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. 3 months ago, they'd had me marched out with a sharpened box. Now they filed past me, heads down, as security waited to escort them from the building they tried to steal. David was last. He stopped at the door, turning back with pure hatred burning in his eyes. This isn't over. Yes, it is. The door closed. The room was empty except for my attorney, still organizing documents, and my mother, still sitting in the corner, still watching, still silent. Everyone out, I said quietly. My attorney glanced between us, read the room, and left without a word. Mom didn't move, didn't stand, just looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not fear, not guilt. Calculation. Like she was running numbers on how this would play out. The Panama accounts, I said. The encrypted instructions to David. The recruitment at the charity gala 7 years ago. Her face didn't change. Your father told you. Dad documented everything. Arthur had the files. She laughed. Actually laughed. Of course he did. James never could let anything go undocumented. She stood finally, smoothing her skirt like we were discussing lunch plans. 32 years I gave that man. I gave 32 years of being second to this company. Every missed anniversary. Every vacation cut short. Every time he chose a lab result over his own family. So you decided to take it from him. I decided to take what I earned. Her eyes were ice. You have no idea what it's like to be invisible in your own marriage. To watch your husband love a building more than he loves you. He built something that saves lives. He built something that consumed his, and mine, and almost yours. She stepped closer. I did you a favor. You were becoming him. Another Morgan man married to microscopes and spreadsheets. I pulled out the last folder, the wire transfers, her signature on the shell company documents. Enough for a federal conspiracy charge. The SEC gets these in an hour along with everything else. For the first time, something flickered behind her eyes. You'd send your own mother to prison? You'd steal your own son's birthright. We stood there, 2 feet apart, 34 years of family dissolving between us. I'm not going to prison. She said it like a fact. I have documentation, too. Insurance policies David doesn't know about. If I go down, everyone goes down. The whole board, half of Zenith's leadership. It'll take years to untangle and cost the company billions in legal fees. You're bluffing. She smiled. The same smile she'd given at my graduation, at my promotion ceremony, at Dad's funeral. I'm your mother. I taught you everything you know about strategy. She picked up her purse. But not everything I know. She walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. You're more like me than you want to admit. The patience, the planning, playing the long game while everyone else panics. She looked back one last time. Your father would be proud and terrified. Then she was gone. I stood alone in the boardroom where they'd tried to destroy me. The same room where Dad had announced our first patent, where I'd been promoted, where I'd been fired. My attorney appeared at the door. The SEC filing is ready. Do you want to include the additional materials? I looked at the folder in my hands. Mom's insurance files were probably real. Releasing everything would trigger years of legal warfare. Collateral damage across the industry. Exactly the chaos she was counting on. Hold the Panama documents for now. File everything else. Not mercy. Containment. If I dropped everything at once, she'd get what she wanted, chaos big enough to hide inside. She thought her insurance policy made her untouchable. But I didn't need a headline. I needed a file that closed like a bear trap. Slowly, quietly, with no room to escape. My attorney nodded and disappeared. Within the hour, I'd made 3 calls. Her credit cards, the ones tied to accounts she thought were hidden, started declining. Not frozen by me directly, just flagged for review. The kind of review that takes months. Her usual lunch spots, the charity committees, the social calendar that defined her identity, those calls would stop being returned soon enough. Not because I threatened anyone, but because people can smell liability like smoke. By the time the forensic accountant finished his work, she'd be isolated. No allies, no leverage, no audience for whatever desperate play she had left. Dad taught me chess. Mom taught me patience. Neither of them taught me that sometimes the winning move is making sure your opponent runs out of pieces before they realize the game changed. 3 weeks after retaking control, Mom showed up at my office unannounced. My assistant tried to stop her, but she swept past like she still owned the building. Maybe in her mind she did. We need to talk. She settled into the chair across from my desk without being invited. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup slightly smudged. She looked diminished somehow, smaller than I'd ever seen her. David left me. Her voice cracked on the words. Disappeared to Belize with the accounts I thought were protected. I have nothing. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The gesture seemed practiced, but her hand was trembling. I know I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I'm still your mother. I need help. Just enough to start over somewhere quiet. She looked up at me with wet eyes. Please, you're all I have left. For just a moment, one dangerous moment, I almost believed her. Then I noticed her purse was positioned toward my desk at an odd angle. The clasp was open, and I could see the faint red glow of a recording indicator inside. That's quite the performance, I said quietly. Were you hoping to get me on tape agreeing to help you flee prosecution, or just trying to gather evidence for a custody of assets claim? Her face went through a transformation so fast it was almost supernatural. The tears stopped instantly. The trembling disappeared. What replaced it was something reptilian. Cold intelligence assessing a failed strategy. You've gotten paranoid, she said flatly. I got careful. I leaned back in my chair. The forensic accountant traced your accounts last week. Your Panama accounts were never really hidden. You just couldn't see who else had access. Her face went pale. David didn't steal your money, Mom. The accounts were frozen by the Department of Justice 3 days ago. You would have known that if you'd tried to access them instead of coming here. She stood abruptly. The mask fully off now. The United States Attorney's Office will be contacting you within 48 hours. I'd recommend having counsel present. I pressed the intercom button. Security. My mother is leaving now. She stared at me with something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Genuine fear. You planned this. She whispered. The whole thing. You let me think I still had leverage. You taught me to play chess, Mom. I met her gaze without flinching. You forgot Dad taught me to see 3 moves ahead. Frank appeared at the door with 2 guards. She gathered her purse, the recording device inside now useless, and walked toward the exit. At the threshold, she turned back one last time. I raised you, she said. I made you. No, I picked up Dad's pen and returned to my paperwork. Dad made me. You just showed me what I never wanted to become. The door closed behind her. I didn't watch her go. As the door closed, I sank into Dad's chair, my chair now. First thing I did, canceled the Zenith meeting, reinstated the R&D budget, sent a company-wide memo that layoffs were off the table. Somewhere out there, David was discovering that Belize has an extradition treaty with the United States. And my mother was learning what it felt like to be invisible. Not to a husband who loved his work, but to a world that had finally seen what she really was. The forensic accountant would need a few more months to complete the full file. By then, the Department of Justice would have everything they needed. No chaos, no billion-dollar legal circus, just a quiet case that closed with the sound of a cell door. We did it, Dad, I whispered to the window. We got it back. Isn't it strange how the people who try to steal your legacy often end up losing everything that defined their own?